Hi, this is Barry. Welcome to the next episode of Simplicity Zen. If you want to help get this webcast seen by more people, if you go to YouTube and like, subscribe, and comment on the videos, that motivates the algorithm to pass it along further. If you want to connect, you can go to the website simplicityzen.com, sign up for the mailing list, and my contact information is there as well. So today my guest is Gregory Wonderwheel. He got on my radars because he's a pretty skilled translator, and he frequents some Facebook groups that I frequent as well. And I'm generally impressed with whatever he posts, and generally learn something every time he posts something. So I was pretty excited that he was willing to do an interview. Full disclosure, I'm sick, and so I'm going to be, I'm kind of spacey as a default, and it's going to be probably worse today. So hopefully everybody has even more patience than usual for me today. So Gregory, can you tell us, we'll go into a little bit of history, but could you tell us a little bit about like who you're practicing with now and kind of what your Zen status is these days?
Right. Yeah. Right now, I'm a apprentice teacher under Daniel Terragno Roshi with Rocks and Clouds Zendo in Sebastopol.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been associated with Rocks and Clouds. Gee, I don't even remember how long. Probably 12 years. Before that, I was with Daniel's teacher, John Tarrant, with Pacific Zen Institute. And before that, I was mostly just a Zen roustabout. My first acquaintance with Zen in person was like 1971. After reading a lot of Zen books, I had a funny experience. I thought I'd just go up to Tassajara and walk in and join. In the old-fashioned way of knocking at the gate. And I hitchhiked down to, I was in Berkeley, and hitchhiked down to Carmel, and then up towards Tassajara, and then I walked the several miles of the dirt road. The car that picked me up dropped me off the pavement there, and I walked several miles to the dirt road and knocked on the big gate at Tassajara and said, "I'm here to join." And they said, "No, you can't do that. You got to go to the San Francisco Zen Center." And the whole process. But it was late in the day, and they said, "But okay, we'll put you in a guest room overnight." So they put me in a guest room up by the baths, and then I'm sitting there just kind of chilling. It's after dark. And then these people start coming into the guest room. They didn't know anybody was there. And it was the monks in residence for the summer retreat period.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about, 5, 6 of them, maybe 7, were all trickling in. And it was their plan to meet there after hours in the dark to open up one of the monks' care packages from home. Surreptitiously, and hand out the goodies, the Hershey bars and all those things that they couldn't get during the retreat period. So that was funny. That was my first personal introduction to Zen people.
Mm-hmm. What was your?
And it was fun.
Do you think they were a little stuffy? What was your impression of them?
Oh, just the opposite. Just the opposite. I expected them to be stuffy, and everybody was just chill and cool and having fun, and just taking a little break from the rigor
This
of
was
the
71.
retreat. I believe it was, yeah.
So before Suzuki passed away, then, right?
Yeah, in fact, after that, I hitchhiked back up to San Francisco Zen Center and actually stayed at the Zen Center for a week. And I did see Suzuki there, very frail, in the hallways, and when he could, sitting in the Zendo. So like I say, I saw him before he died, but that's as close as I got to him. Being in the hallway when he and his small entourage passed by.
How did you, so you must have known about Zen somehow to hitchhike down there. Like, how did you discover about Buddhism or spirituality in general?
Well, the way I discovered Buddhism per se was I took a class at a junior college in Los Angeles on world religions. And we went through the book, Christianity and paganism and Hinduism and Christianity and Taoism, Confucianism, and got to Buddhism. And after we went through the Buddhism section, I just said, that's me. So then I started reading every single thing I could get, like the entire Alan Watts collection.
This is in the 60s?
Yeah, 68, 69, 70. Read everything I could, all D.T. Suzuki. So basically, I focused on D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts because that was what was most accessible. But also I got that wonderful Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. That was a classic of the 60s.
Right.
And then, of course, there was Timothy Leary and Ramdas, Alpert, and they had talked about the Tibetan Book of the Dead as the guidebook for anybody using psychedelics. So I grabbed that up real quick and went through that as well. And so that was my intellectual introduction to Buddhism and Zen. Because everything I read, I just said, oh yeah, this is right. It's just the resonance with the intuitive wisdom just was there.
So you mentioned psychedelics. Were you tripping at this point? Were you caught up in the counterculture scene at all?
Well, I wouldn't call it that, as you could call it that. I wouldn't call it that. For me, it was genuine psychic exploration. I was watching my friends taking psychedelics just for fun, just for to party with, but I never did that. For me, it was following Leary and Alpert as and what Aldous Huxley, I think was it Aldous Huxley who wrote the
Doors of Perception.
Doors of Perception, right? And so that's what it was for me. So it was genuine exploration, and I diligently used the Tibetan Book of the Dead and its discussion of the Bardo states as my guidebook for psychedelic experience.
Did the class come? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Did the class come first and then the psychedelic use, or the other way around, or were they kind of simultaneous?
They were weaving in and out, but I had taken pot beforehand, but it wasn't until I got acquainted with the Buddhist stuff that I really got into. Well, it was simultaneously when I was reading when I took the class and learning about Buddhism that I was first introduced to the LSD and those psychedelics. So that happened simultaneously. So I was very grateful that I came across the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because it has everything in there about facing the wrathful deities, facing the beneficial deities, and the clear light, and that everything about having to go, basically the koan of don't think good, don't think evil is there also in the Book of the Dead, in terms of you have to maintain that frame of mind when meeting the deities in the Bardo state. So that was my approach to it. So so many people didn't understand that when you take a genuine psychedelic, it calls up your shadow states. Later on, in the late 70s, I went to college and studied Jungian psychology. So now I use that terminology, although I didn't have that terminology earlier. But it calls up your shadow, and that's what is Buddhism calls the wrathful deities. The archetypes of the shadow and the things that we fear get called up in psychedelic experience.
In,
And a
in
lot of people never understood that.
in Buddhist terms, would you say these are kleshas, or is this something other than that?
Well, they are, yeah, they are what we might call the avatars of the kleshas.
Mm-hmm.
Are they are
Oh, you're
the
saying like
way that
literally
we,
the visualization of the deity. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be anything. It could be a person with a big squashed strawberry head, or it could be a looking at a mountainside and it turning into a giant gorilla, ready to pounce down on you. I mean, lots of these kinds of things can happen, and it happened to me, of course. But my practice in doing that was to remain still, like the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, and to meet these things as Mara, as Mara attempting to move me from the still spot, from the clear spot. And so a lot of my contemporaries didn't have that sense of, this is the exploration. This is the practice of sitting still in the face of all these things.
I think a lot of people, some negative aspects of psychedelics is a lot of people will be like, "Oh my God, I'm dying!" Ah, I think a lot of that is they're actually, they're being pushed into ego dissolution or some sort of no self type of experience. I think that's really scary for a lot of people too. I think, and probably maybe
Right,
the majority of negative health
right. But
experiences are of that sort.
that sense of getting pushed into it rather than sitting into it.
Mm-hmm.
And letting the fear aspect carry us away. Letting the fear aspect carry us away, and then we lose our concentration. We lose the samadhi state. One thing I learned after all my psychedelic experiences was that it's a chemical samadhi state, but it's only, the samadhi aspect of it is only partly chemical, in the sense that how our brain chemistry works, and it doesn't, not everyone can get a clear samadhi state out of it. But the image I used, it's like getting to the mountaintop with a helicopter instead of trudging up the path to the top of the mountain. Mm-hmm. So in that way, there isn't a sense of artificiality about the samadhis that psychedelics can engender. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, they are genuine samadhi states. And so I think it's wrong for some people to say, oh, there's nothing you can get from psychedelic experience, or it's all just artificial, or blah, blah, blah. No. But the other half is also true. They are, you are dependent on the chemistry of the pill. And so my arc of exploration went as far as I could with the psychedelic, and then I stopped taking it and became a Zen practitioner, essentially.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. You're familiar with the formless jhanas, the Arupa states, I assume?
Yeah. Got
reading
the
those.
eight genres. They got the four form and then the four
Yeah.
formless ones. Yeah.
Yeah, the four formalists, I remember when I first read those, I thought like, oh, yeah, this a lot of the LSD experiences I had were, kind of match these almost perfectly. It,
Right.
it,
Exactly. Yeah.
and for me, I was pretty lucky that I was seeing the Grateful Dead at the time. This was the late '80s and stuff, and it was just such a safe environment to completely let go. I didn't really have a lot of the scary times. I mean, I had a few kind of sometimes like before the music would start, I'd be a little edgy, but it was Jerry Garcia's music was just such an infinite safety net for those type of experience. It was just so easy
Right.
to completely let go. I felt just so incredibly fortunate to have encountered that. Did you ever see the Grateful Dead with your during that era of your
That
life?
was one of the few. That was one of the few I missed because I was an LA boy.
Hmm.
I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, and I never did get to see him, but I saw lots and lots of rock and roll all over Los Angeles and stuff. I was just the other day trying to reminisce over all the bands I saw, and
Doors, probably, right?
oh, I saw the Doors. I saw, yeah, Doors, Steve Miller, Janis Joplin when she was still Big Brother and the Holding Company, Country Joe and the Fish, Buffalo Springfield when they were still Buffalo Springfield,
How
Chambers
about
Brothers.
what was his name? Frank Zappa, was he around during that
Oh,
time?
oh yeah, I saw Frank Zappa and at the Shrine Auditorium.
That's one of my big
Oh,
regrets is
actually,
never seeing Zappa.
oh yeah, yeah. Oh, he had great. I saw Alice Cooper before they went goth.
Right.
Uh, their first incarnation was space psychedelic space music.
Yeah, I've heard it. It's,
Uh,
it's really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and then they went goth, and I kind of lost interest
Mhm.
because I've always been uh, the psychedelic rock fan, but I saw my one of the best shows I saw live was at the Whiskey A Go Go, two act of um, the Velvet Underground and the
Oh,
Chicago
nice.
Transit Authority.
Nice.
And, and
Dallas.
at that time, they were still called Chicago Transit Authority, and before they just shortened it to Chicago,
Hmm.
because I think there was some kind of claim from the real Chicago Transit Authority didn't want them calling them that anymore.
It's funny.
Um, but they just blew. That was a sound that was so different from the regular rock and roll with their horn sections and Terry Kath, the guitar player, was every bit the equal of Jimi Hendrix.
Hmm.
In fact, Jimi Hendrix said that he admired Terry Kath's guitar work the most of anybody else.
No.
They were fantastic. Yeah.
So you mentioned you went to school to study union psychology, but I remember reading in your bio you were an attorney, right?
Yeah, that was later actually. Uh, uh, I was in school getting my BA and MA in psychology in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s. And then I worked in mental health for 12 years. And then my wife had a great idea of let's go to law school because we'd been involved in a couple lawsuits that really didn't end well. And we thought, hell, we could do as good as that. So we went to a local night school called Empire College, which I call the best little law school in California, based on uh, that best little whorehouse in Texas story.
Hmm.
Um, but and so I became an attorney in 2000. Um, and so I just retired a month ago because my health it was too bad. But yeah, so I was an attorney for 21 years.
Well,
But that was my last career.
what kind of law did you
Before,
practice?
what's that?
What kind of law did you practice?
Oh, I started off practicing civil law, and but I found out pretty quickly that I'm not a businessman. I was of an age that there wasn't any um, law firms that wanted to hire me, you
Hmm.
know, and I didn't know anybody per se to like get a dual practice with. So I just tried to open shop on my own as a solo practitioner. I had enough cases to keep me going, but I didn't have the business sense of hiring, a legal secretary and bookkeeper and all that stuff. So I only did that for a couple of years, and then I found a niche. Didn't pay much, but it gave me all the freedom I wanted. And it's what's called being an appearance attorney, where you go to court for an attorney who can't get there. So it's like a pinch hitter or a substitute teacher.
Hmm.
I was on a couple of registries, and then a couple of attorneys just would call me directly, and people would call and say, so and so can't make it to court that day. Can you go to court? And so for the last 15 years, basically, I was doing that. And that was a heck of a lot of fun because that relieved me of the burden of having to write the papers and get them in on deadline and all that kind of stuff. And I basically, the attorney I was appearing for had written the motions, and I would go to court and argue it.
So you're like a
Or
substitute teacher almost.
exactly,
That's
and that
cool.
was a hell of a lot of fun because I got to lots and lots of courthouses and got to meet lots and lots of judges and all the court staff and stuff, and uh, that was a lot of fun. The court staff is uh, makes everything go right. So it always cracks me up when I see attorneys that don't do the sugar for the staff.
Hmm.
For me, it's always be nice and friendly with the staff because when you walk out the door, they'll let the judge know who you were.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Um, yeah. So
so basically, for me, being an attorney was just has been just a fun job that would give me a lot of time, a lot of free time to do my translation work and other things.
it's great.
Yeah.
So back to the Zen story. So you
Yeah.
you you spent a week at San Francisco Zen Center. What was your next step with your Zen career at that point?
Oh, what happened? Yeah, what happened was I got I had been drafted in 1968 and registered as a conscientious objector. Um, and I went through the appeal. First, I got a letter saying, no, we reject it. So then I had to write a letter appeal. And then they said, no, we reject that. And so then eventually I was at San Francisco Zen Center when I got a letter saying, you have to report to the uh, induction center on such and such a day, which was like 3 weeks away. So I had to leave there and go back down to Los Angeles. And then I did an Arlo Guthrie routine. Um, I went to the induction center because if you refuse to induction, it's a different crime than if you refuse to go to the induction center. So I went to the induction center. I had been in contact with through the LA Free Press, one of the what they called underground newspapers of the time. In fact, that was where I first came across the Heart Sutra in an underground newspaper. The San Francisco Zen Center version of the Heart Sutra was printed in one. Um, so I got in contact with this ACLU, with the ACLU, and they said, we can't represent you until after you refuse. because we have to know that you're serious. So I went down to the induction center, and I went through every test. You dress, you take off all your clothes, and you're walking around in your underwear, holding your clothes in a bag. And like they had the color wheel to see if you're colorblind, and a whole bunch of dots with a number in it. And say, what number is it? And I'd give them a different number. And they have the eye test where it says, which direction are the 3 prongs pointed in? And I would say a different direction. So every test I did, I did the opposite. So then they said, well, then I went and I did the intelligence test. And of course, I answered them all wrong. And they looked at the test and they said, you're going to see the shrink. So I went in to see the shrink, and he says, I know you're very intelligent because you got all but 1 wrong. And he says, if you had just done it randomly, you would have got 25% right. But I know that you knew which one was the right one and answered it wrong. So I know you're very intelligent. And we had this hilarious conversation, where I said, well, I don't know what my sexuality is. I might be gay. And I said, if you put a gun in my hands, I don't know who I'm going to shoot it at. The guy that puts the gun in my hands and tells me I should kill, or whoever, because I'm not into killing. And after the end of the conversation, he did the stereotype. He says, son, I'm going to pass you, and the army will make a man out of you. And so then I went and they wanted to draw blood, and that's where I drew the line and said, no, you're not drawing blood. Then they take me into a little room with 4 gorillas of men. I mean, these were NFL linebackers, and they were, and they had me sitting down, and they were all around me in a chair, and they said, come on, all you got to do is just get in line, and at the end, when they say raise your hand and swear the oath, you don't have to take the oath. And I was smart enough to know, no, that ain't happening, because they'll just pretend they heard me take the oath and wix me on the bus. So so I said, no thanks, I'm not taking the blood test. And that was the one essential thing they had to know before they could pass you. So they said, the FBI is going to come and get you. Get out of here now, and the FBI is going to come after you. A couple of months later, sure enough, I got so from there, I went to Cimarron Zen Center and lived across the street from the Cimarron Zen Center with Sasaki Roshi, who was the head there. And I lived across the street. What's that?
The Renzai teacher.
Yeah. And who was Mount Baldy. So it was at the time where they were just opening up Mount Baldy. So I got to be at one of the first or second sessions held up at Mount Baldy. And then, so I was there for 3 months, and then I got a job in the valley and moved. And then I came home one day, and there was a business card of the FBI in my door, and it said, call us. I called them, and they said, we want to talk to you. I said, okay, let me tell my lawyer, and he'll set up an appointment. And they said, we don't want to talk to your lawyer. We want to talk to you. I said, no way. Call my attorney. Here's his name. And then a couple months later, I got a letter from my attorney, and it was a deal. It was a letter for me to sign and offer a deal to the draft board, which was, my appeal had taken so long that in between they started the lottery. So they never changed my status from 1H to anything else. I mean, from whatever it was before. So the deal was, if you make me 1H, which was called the holding, that was the status you got as if you went through the lottery and your number was never picked.
Mm-hmm.
Because technically I had gone through the lottery with my number never picked during that first lottery year, because my number had been picked my number, I had been drafted first originally 3 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, I'll stop asking to be a CO if you stop asking to draft me. And the draft board signed off on that,
Cool.
just because they didn't want the statistics of how many people were being COs.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
So what was your impression of Sasaki and that whole scene?
Oh, I it was pretty good. I had 100% affinity with his teishos. He would give a teisho, and I just loved it. To me, it was that sense of myself speaking to myself, and then doing sanzen. They call it sanzen instead of dokusan.
Mm-hmm.
Doing sanzen with him was always tricky. He was a fast bell ringer, and his English was very almost non-existent. So it was very difficult to build a verbal rapport with him in terms of the sanzen, because he didn't really care what your verbal response was to the koans. And his koans were all not the Hakuin curriculum. His koans were all the other branch of, and ones that basically he would make himself.
Yeah, didn't he have some like, "Where's God when you're driving a car" or something like that? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he would go back and forth.
Did he put you on Moo at all, or any sort of breakthrough con, or was it just kind of random?
No, it was always like, how do you realize the redwood tree? Things like that. So it was cool. And I had some wonderful experiences with him. One day I stole, the teacher sits there with their stick.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a short stick. Most of the time he sat with the stick laid on the floor in front of him if he didn't pick it up. Sometimes he'd pick it up and wave it at you like he was going to hit you, but not hit you. One time he was asking me about emptiness, I think it was. And I just sat there unmoving as my demonstration of emptiness, right? And he would say, and so I stuck with it. He rang his bell and I stuck with it. I didn't move. And this was in the 70s. So at that point, he was about late 60s. And he was short, but he jumped up in a flash, grabbed me by the back of the collar, and dragged me out of the sanzen room. It was amazing. But it was an insight to me. I didn't have like a great enlightenment experience, but I definitely had an insight experience because basically he was demonstrating emptiness in action. And I was there demonstrating emptiness, not in action, right? So that was very good. On another occasion, I took his stick from him and went back to the Zendo And when I came into the Zendo, I held up the stick and I said, "Who does this belong to?" And put it down on the altar. Oh, the official, the officers of the Zendo all got in a tizzy, and they they came and made me leave my seat and go across the I don't know, well, the pathway, to what they called the alternate or overflow Zendo when there were so many people. So they basically put me in exile in the alternate Zendo, and had me sit there while they figured out what they were going to do with me. Was my offense so bad that I would have to leave or whatever? And then the word came down that Roshi said, "No, that's fine. That's fine. Put him back in." So they brought me back into the Zendo.
How long did you
So
practice with them in that group?
um, well, it was off and on for many years, but at first it was a lot in the first year or two. Then it was like I'd go down to because I moved up to Northern California, and I would only go down to Mount Baldy, every 3 years or so for quite a while.
Did you practice with other groups or other teachers during that period too?
No, it wasn't until I connected with John Tarrant in Sonoma County that I had a regular practice back with a Zen Sangha. I
When was
rousted
that?
about a lot. I went to visit a lot of different Zendos.
Mhm.
When I got to Sonoma County, I went up to
Sonoma Mountain Zen
Joshu,
Center.
Joshu Kwong Roshi's place. I did a session there. That's a Soto place.
What year was that? Do you
And
remember?
that would have been 78, 77, I think.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But I didn't feel the affinity there. He's a great guy, very nice guy.
Yeah, I lived
But
there
I
for almost
just
a
never.
year actually.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
I just never felt the affinity with their family style.
Mhm.
Uh, and of course, they don't work with the koan structure. And been around with different places.
Probably
The
visited Green Gulch and stuff like that.
I visited Green Gulch, but never did a session there. I did do a session out in Pine Bush with Guo Gu's group in Shenyang's tradition, the
Mhm.
Chan Dharma drum people.
Do you,
They're fantastic.
do you ever check out City of 10,000 Buddhas a couple hours north of you?
I did go there too, and but they're an odd duck. They're Chinese Buddhism, so they are that hybrid of Pure Land and Chan,
Mhm.
and there didn't seem any clear entry point for a lay practitioner. Like when you go there, there was like no instructions on how to join or anything.
Did you ever check out Ring of Bone up in Nevada City area?
No,
No.
no, no.
So how'd you hook up with John Tarrant?
Oh, I I said, oh, I got to get back into a teacher relationship, and started looking around for local teachers and saw that he was in the Diamond Sangha tradition. I said that works for me because I'd read a lot of Aiken's books and things. So we just, my wife and I just, I went there first, and then my wife joined me, and we started practicing with them.
Yeah. What was your initial reaction or opinion of him, or how did that come across to you?
I don't want to get into opinions of him
Oh, okay.
or other teachers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And the reason I
I
ask,
will say he's definitely a good teacher, and he was a good teacher for me.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, the reason I asked the
and
question
that's what,
is I've just been surprised at how many people get attracted to teachers, not so much what they say or what they teach or anything like that. It's more just kind of their vibe, you know. So I was kind of
that's,
fishing for that a little bit, you know.
yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's interesting, because for me, that that's what I call affinity.
Hmm.
And affinity definitely has to be there. But I have witnessed way too much emphasis on the affinity or the charisma, and I noticed that basically almost in most places
Hmm.
where people, because to me it's what they say, especially what they say in the Teisho, or what happens what is said in the Sanzen Dokusan room, that is the meat and bones of it. So so to me, you've got the Zazen, and you've got the Teisho, and you've got the interview, and those are the three most important legs of the Zen training.
Hmm.
And to me, the affinity is just sort of what makes you feel at home with this guy or this woman. Um,
Not necessarily a Zen
but
thing, just a human chemistry thing.
yeah, I mean, it is definitely a Zen thing, in the sense that you hear it's all over the Zen literature,
Hmm.
uh, uh, where Joshu stayed with Nansen for, I don't know, 40 years, because their affinity was so strong. But other Zen teachers would go on pilgrimage and meet teacher, or work with teacher after teacher, um, until they found a teacher that had that affinity for
Hmm.
them.
Did you start on
So
me? Oh, sorry.
uh, with uh, with Tarrant, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. How was that experience for you working on Moo?
Well, here again, we're in an area that I don't really like to talk about.
Hmm.
I don't like to talk about one's personal work on a koan, on a
Hmm.
specific koan. To me, what happens is when we sit with a koan, uh, a lot of people talk about the difference between koan work and shikantaza. And I always say there is no difference,
Hmm.
because it's not until you, you're the shikantaza settles into the koan that a valid response to the koan arises in the prajna mind.
Hmm.
So a lot of people don't understand that aspect of it. That I think a lot of people who work with koans don't understand that what's happening is that business of getting to just sitting. You get to just sitting. Shikantaza, of course, means only take care of hitting the sitting. And hitting the sitting is like hitting the books, just paying attention to it. So it's only when you get to that level of samadhi state, um, that the valid response to the koan can be revealed. A lot of koan practitioners don't understand that is shikantaza. And a lot of Shikantaza practitioners don't understand, there has to be the mind of inquiry attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
If you just say, oh, I'm just sitting and I'm just listening, or da 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 da, if there's no mind of inquiry that adds the who is listening, who is sitting, or what is listening, what is sitting, what is this, what is it? If that level of inquiry isn't there, then people can sit shikantaza for 20 years and
Mm-hmm.
they got nothing to say for it.
Yeah,
So
and Dogen all over his writings is constantly motivating people to have an inquiry based approach to practice. I mean,
right,
that's like
yeah, I think
99% of his writing.
some of the translators will translate it as investigate this. He'll say something and then say investigate this. Uh, that's what I agree with you. That's the point Dogen is making.
Hmm. So speaking of translation, I'd be curious how you got into that. Did you always have an interest in Asian languages? Like, did you have an interest in Asian languages first and got into translating, or was it the other way around?
No,
Learn the languages
the
because
other
the
way
translate.
around. And
Yeah.
basically, as much as one can be humble about being humble, I say that I'm a shade tree translator, like a shade tree mechanic, or maybe a lot of people don't know what shade tree mechanic means these days. But I'm an autodidact, a self-taught translator, and I never worked in the shop of the academy and had formal education in it. What happened to me was I just got very interested in reading Zen texts and of course also sutras. And so I would look at the Wumen Guan and see that different translators translated the same case with so differently.
Hmm.
And I started questioning, well, what's going on here? What's going on here? So that's when I started looking up the Chinese characters to understand why are they translating it so differently.
Are
For
you always
example, even
translating from Chinese, or do you ever go from the Japanese too?
uh, I did in college, I took a conversational Japanese course. And so I did get familiar with the hiragana and katakana. Uh, but mostly I work with Chinese texts, um, a little bit with, I've dabbled a little bit with some of Dogen's, like the Ginjo Koan and stuff, in which is written in a hybrid. It has it's the Japanese with hiragana with kanji. But mostly I stick with the early texts from China, which are all characters.
Are
And
you working? Are you working from text of modern Chinese that was translated from medieval Chinese, or do you actually read the medieval Chinese? Like, are you essentially like reading, Chaucer in his original language type of stuff, or are you reading like the modern translation into like modern
well,
Chinese?
we're fortunate enough that there's not at all such a big difference in Chinese um, until you get to Mao Zedong. Uh,
Hmm.
Mao Zedong created the modern Chinese because as part of the literacy project. But before him, there's very little change in the traditional Chinese. But I'm working off of primarily um, uh, the Electronic Buddhist Text Association's catalog of,
Hmm.
of the texts. And what you find out is the Chinese characters are all the same, but they have an editorial committee that puts in commas and periods. And you may disagree with where they put in the commas and periods.
Does it change the
Uh,
meaning?
it can, yeah. And it can change, where something that I would think, I hardly ever disagree, but every once in a while I'll see one that says, where I said, I don't think that period should be there. I think that period should be like 3 characters over.
Does it change like who said what, like at that level, or?
No, usually not. Usually not. Usually it's just like whether a phrase is at the end of a sentence or the beginning of the next sentence. And for practical purposes, these are very minor things which are small. The bigger things to me are the first one that really got my attention and caused me to tackle it, the Wu Min Guan first, was it was called the Gateless Gate. And anybody who looks at the Chinese, Wu Min Guan, Wu means without, Min is gate, and Guan is not Min. Or in the Japanese, it's Mu Mon Kan. So if it was the Gateless Gate, it would be Wu Mon Mon. So it's like that was the first thing that really got my attention. Is why are people calling it the Gateless Gate when clearly it says Wu Min Guan or Mu Mon Kan. So I looked into this word Guan or Kan, and it doesn't mean gate. It means the frontier checkpoint. It means the checkpoint. And for people of my age, the most famous checkpoint was Checkpoint Charlie on the Berlin Wall. And so that's what it is. It's the checkpoint where you've got someone there saying, show me your papers. If you want to get past, show me your papers. So it's the gateless checkpoint, and that's the way I've titled it from my translation. Aiken calls it the gateless barrier because he wants to get away from the gateless gate, but he doesn't want to go so far as to. He wants it to be accessible, so he calls it barrier. Because a lot of people, when they look at mine and it says the gateless checkpoint, and they don't have the clear associations I have with the word checkpoint. So it may be a little disconcerting or distance making.
The gateless guard shack.
Gateless checkpoint. What's that?
The gateless guard shack, or I don't know.
Yeah, but it's a frontier pass, or it's the place in the boundary where you go from one land to another. And they have that, the frontier checkpoint is, you have that archetypal, the little house with a bar that goes down across the path.
Right.
And there's a guard standing there, and you have to show them that you're entitled to pass by. And that is exactly what the koans are, and what Wu Min's commentary to the Mu Koan talks about, the checkpoint. You have to pass the checkpoint.
Speaking of the Mu Koan, I noticed in your translation, you said, is the puppy also Buddha nature or not? Well, so two interesting things. You translated as puppy, and you didn't translate it as does the puppy have Buddha nature? You translated is the puppy Buddha nature, essentially. I mean, could you talk a little bit about those translation choices?
Yeah. Well, the puppy is one that I specifically borrowed from Sasaki Roshi down at Mount Baldy. At the beginning of a session, his first teisho would be on Mu. And so everybody would had his translation of the Mu Koan, and that's how he translated it, as puppy. And that's because there's two characters, one for dog and one for one that is ambivalent. This is the problem with Chinese, is there's so much room for ambivalence to arise depending on how you hear it or how you read it. So the two characters, the second character can either mean child or young one. So he was reading it as dog, young one, a young dog, puppy. But that character can also be a particle, which means the preceding character is a noun. And that works if you have a verb followed by that character, you know the preceding character is a noun. But since the preceding character was the character for dog, it doesn't make sense that particle, everybody knows the dog would be a noun. So I read it, that character as meaning a young dog. And so thus I translated puppy. But I first came across Sasaki Roshi's translation as puppy. Then when I looked at the text, I could argue to myself, oh, this is how he got there. He didn't just make it up. He's looking at the juxtaposition of those two characters and how to read the second character as a noun particle or as an adjective of the preceding character. So that's the question that comes up in all translations, and that's basically what I would call the stereotypical example of how you can get so much difference in translations, because the translator in English has to determine these things. And sometimes you have to, what a Chinese noun sometimes has to be turned into a verb to make sense in English. But essentially,
is that because the verb is implicit in the Chinese, or just?
Yeah, it's because the Chinese doesn't have what do we call it? Conjugation. What do you call it when you have
when they're joining together?
Well, he sat, he is sitting, he will sit. You know, Chinese doesn't have that. It just has the one word sit. So you have to interpret it. Is it sit, sat, sitting? And that's all contextualized based on the whole sentence and the picture of what you're seeing. That's there. So that's another example of how you do it. Basically, in translation, you have the way I look at it is you have two alternative choices. The word for word version of translating are the idea for idea translation.
Which
the idea for idea translation.
Cleary seems very much an idea for idea type translator, right?
Exactly. And that's why I love the guy. The guy's a bodhisattva translator who's just given us so much. But when you compare him to others, you go, well, how did he get that? So I tend to the word for word, and I make my reader. I discussed some of this in the introduction to my translation of the Wu Ming Guan. I make the reader do some work. Most translators try to relieve the reader from having to work at it. They want to come up with English that flows very prosaically and poetically, easy to read. I tend to the other way, but I don't want to go so far in the literal that it comes out like Charlie Chan English. For the younger crowd, they may not know who Charlie Chan is, but that was all the movies of the 30s and 40s. And but when in doubt, it has to be readable to the English reader. But when in question, I always lean toward the word for word. And another thing that was my pet peeve, that is my pet peeve, is you'll have a word like dharma, and sometimes it'll get translated as in the same text. The translator will sometimes call it the law, the truth, principle,
Teachings.
Right, the teaching, and I reject that categorically. And for every Chinese word, I strive to have only one English word that will translate that Chinese word. So
What do
the
you
reader,
translate
when
dharma
they
as?
see, what's that?
What do you translate dharma as?
I do not translate that. I borrow that, and I typically just have the word dharma in there. So I don't say dharma dhatu, I say dharma realm.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't and I translate dharmakaya as dharma body. And I translate Buddha dharma as Buddha dharma. I don't say Buddha teaching or Buddha law or anything like that. So there's a couple of words: nirvana, dharma. I don't translate Buddha, and most of these words I check, and they are in English dictionaries. So that's why I don't fret about not translating them.
How about the grammar here? When you say, is the puppy also Buddha nature or not? Like the also is not something I've seen in another translation. And it's because most translation, does the dog have Buddha nature? Some say Buddha
Right.
nature or not. Some just say, does it have Buddha nature? But
Right.
yours is quite a bit different grammatically. Could you talk a little bit about your choices there?
All right, let's take a second and see if I can call up I'm opening up my translation to see if I can, here we go. What do you got here? Oh, what are you looking at? You're looking at the online version?
Yeah, it's where is that?
Oh, okay. Every time I look at here's another problem with translating. Every time a translator visits the project, they want to change things around.
Right. Let's see here. Yeah, I don't have it up anymore. Sorry.
Yeah, the Chinese character Zhao. Oh, I see. Yeah, is the dog also Buddha nature? Let me see if I can find. Here we go. Okay, so literally, the word is or is not or does isn't in the sentence. Here's the problem. So here's a strictly literal translation. Zhao Zhou Osho, Zhao Zhou venerable, because monk asked, dog child also have Buddha nature or not? Zhao said, not. That's the literal translation. Now the word have, the reason I chose the word for have can also mean exist as. So in one version of the translation I had, does the puppy also exist as Buddha nature or not? But going back to it, I think it's better to say, I kind of will, today I would go back and allow have, because it's, well, here's the problem. The character is u, and the character for not is mu or wu.
Mhm.
So we have this polarity, u and wu. And
Mhm.
u, which is translated as have, also means existence or to exist as. And mu it also could be translated as non-existence.
Mhm.
So in some translations, you will see u and mu together as existence and non-existence.
Mhm.
So you have this dynamic in the question, does the dog exist or not exist as Buddha nature?
And of course, there's a subsequent koan where he says it does have it too.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So in this case, he's saying doesn't exist, or he just says mu, woo, no.
Mhm.
And we have to deal with Wu Min's commentary to kind of not think about it in terms of existence or non-existence, delve deeper than that.
Mhm.
But the koan itself deliberately sets up the polarity u and wu.
Mhm.
And
So
that's
some
what the
translations
questioner
don't
is
have that at
asking.
all.
Right. And the questioner is really, this is one of these cases where the questioner, his own mind is trapped between these polarities, u and wu, uh, um, uh, existence and non-existence. And to the extent that he's asking Xiao Zhou sincerely, he wants Xiao Zhou to clear it up for him. On the other hand, you could say he's kind of devious in his own mind, trying to see how Xiao Zhou will deal with this trap
Mhm.
of having or not having, existing or not existing. And like you say, on one occasion, Xiao Zhou says, no, doesn't exist that way. And on another occasion, he says, yep, it exists that way. He has Buddha nature. So, uh, so that's like Humpty Dumpty, we say that's the glory of the koans, that they you you never get trapped in words in the koans. So koans are all about teaching us how to be free within the words, free when using words.
Speaking of words, so here's something I've always wondered, and I think you can answer this for me. So there's wu means not or negation in the context of this koan, but I also know that phonetically wu means awakening in Chinese. Are they the same character, or are they different
No,
characters that just
no.
share a?
In Chinese, you have 5 different. See, the problem with Chinese now, and I've never learned to speak Chinese. I have to admit that.
Mhm.
I've I've taught myself to deal with the Chinese language using dictionaries like a Rosetta Stone. Uh, but I know enough about Chinese that they have the different inflections. They got, and I've never trained my ear to hear the inflections. But there's a wu that means without, not. There's
Mhm.
a wu that means the number 5. There's a wu that means awakening. And there's a couple more woos.
Is it just a
And each,
coincidence that wu means awakening and wu, maybe with a slightly different inflection, means not? Is that just a coincidence, or do you think there was a decision there at all?
I would, until I knew differently, I would say that's just the coincidence of the development of the language.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So another question I have is, throughout the koans you have, um, Buddha nature is mind, ordinary mind is the way, so forth. So mind, what character is mind, or what word is mind translating? And then a step from that, what what is the underlying Sanskrit or Pali that mind?
Right. Right. Okay, and that's a good question because, in fact, I'd say that's probably the most important question in Zen.
Mhm.
Um, um, the Sanskrit, well, here's the problem. Again, the ambiguity of Chinese. The Chinese character for mind can also be read as heart.
Heart mind.
And if you look at the character, its original picture is like the picture of a heart. It's got a little, it's got some aortas on top and a dip on the bottom, which looks like, and it actually kind of looks like a heart. But it was used to translate heart as the organ of awareness, not the heart as the blood pumper. There's another Chinese character that is used when it's talking about the physical blood pumper, heart.
Does it mean heart as in center, maybe? Or is it just heart as in?
Well, yeah, it's like what it has all the connotations of heart as the emotional center, heart as the center of awareness. Yeah, where we look at the brain, they look at the heart in terms of where's your mind located. You know, we would say it's in the brain, they would say it's in the heart, but it's talking about the mind located in the heart, not the blood pumper. So in Sanskrit, it's the word chitta.
Oh, it is.
Citta.
Okay.
Yeah. There's another, for the physical heart, it's Hirdirya. And so that's why the Heart Sutra actually is not the Mind Sutra. It's the Heart Sutra, because it uses that word. And I'm not so great at pronouncing them. Hirdirya, Hydyra, something like that. And that's why it's the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra, not Mind Sutra. If it was the Chitta Sutra instead of the Hirdirya Sutra, then we would translate it, or I would, as Mind Sutra. But it's Chitta. And so bodhicitta is the mind of awakening. Although a lot of people will call it, they'll translate in that, and they'll translate chitta there as the thought of awakening. And I would never do that. I would always translate it as the mind of awakening, or the awakening mind.
Or what about the translation of the mind that seeks awakening?
Well, I have to look. Yeah, I mean, that's the way I would write it. Mind, basically in Chinese, you'd have mind, seek, awakening. Mind, seek, bodhi.
So there's a lot of things I want to ask you, but I'm gonna probably ask you the highest priority one, and then if you're still
Sure.
after that, I'll ask you some more stuff. So the one thing I definitely want to cover today is the one vehicle Zen. Could you talk a little bit about that, kind of define it and how you got interested in it, and maybe give some examples?
Yeah, for sure. The main reason I got into it was reading D.T. Suzuki's Studies in the Lankavatara Sutra, and where he spoke about at the beginning of the in his introduction to his studies, he had in 1930s, 1933 thereabouts, Suzuki did his translation. First, he did studies of the Lankavatara Sutra. Then that was sort of like his preparation for doing the translation. And then a year or two later, I think the study, I don't have it with me, but the studies may have come out in like, let's see, I've got it up on my screen here. See if I can get a date. Originally published 1930. And then in 33 was when he published his translation, his full translation of the Lankavatara Sutra. But I didn't come across it until, I don't know when. I found two hardback, I found the pair of them in hardback version in a used bookstore, and started reading them. And came across his introduction, where he talks about the connection between the Lankavatara Sutra and Zen. And so he's got a section in his introduction, the Lankavatara and Bodhidharma, the father of Zen Buddhism in China. And it refers to this very early text called the Continued Biographies of Eminent Monks. And it talks about Bodhidharma handing the Lankavatara onto the second ancestor, Hui Ke. And that doesn't show up in the Zen literature itself, because the Zen literature itself tries to downplay the influence of the written words, the texts.
Was it an early? Oh, sorry. Was it an early lamp history actually called of Zen? Actually called like the teachers of the Lankavatara or something like that? Like they actually titled one of their early.
Well, there was an early book called The Masters of the Lankavatara, and that was actually a book about the lineage of the fifth ancestor through Shin Shu, the quote rival to Huineng, and his lineage considered him to be the sixth ancestor, and he moved to the capital of China, and it was a couple disciples after him who wrote this book called The Masters of the Lankavatara, which has a lot of very fascinating information in it. But so that's basically what happened. Was his branch continued to emphasize the Lankavatara, but the Huineng branch emphasized more the Diamond Sutra, because that was the sutra that sparked Huineng's awakening. But of course, Huineng never himself disparaged the Lankavatara. In fact, he mentioned it. It's mentioned in the
Platform Sutra.
Platform Sutra, right? So, and Matsu, of course, the famous grandson in the Dharma of Huineng, he too said that the Buddha mind is certified in the Lankavatara. Now, going back to the spark that led me off this onto this was, there was a monk called Fa Chung who himself lectured 30 times on the Lankavatara. But then he came across a monk who had been personally instructed by Hui Ke, the second ancestor, in the teaching of the Lankavatara. And D.T. Suzuki says, according to the interpretations of the Ekayana school of southern India. And then after meeting this guy, Chung again lectured on it over 100 times. So what this tells us is by an objective observer retelling the story. And D.T. Suzuki affirms it from his point of view, that Bodhidharma taught the Lankavatara according to this, what was called the one vehicle school, the Ekayana school of southern India. D.T. Suzuki writes, the line of Hui Kei belonged to the Ekayana school of southern India, which was also the one resorted to by Dharma himself when he wanted to discourse on the philosophy of Zen Buddhism. Of course, that word philosophy is Suzuki trying to modernize it, but basically it should say the discourse on the Dharma of Zen Buddhism. And he says, to this Ekayana school belong the Avatamsaka, the Stradotpana, which is the arousing of faith, as well as the Lankavatara and other works. And so then the second time I came across it was in this book here, the Platform Sutra by Philip Yamplotsky. And he has a note in which he refers to that same book about the one vehicle school of southern India.
Is this a Mahayana school?
What's that?
This is a Mahayana school?
Well, that's the question.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, until you come across this in this book from the 7th century China, nobody's talking about the one vehicle school. So my question was, what happened to it? Where did it go? Why don't we have it anymore? And what you find out is the Ratnagotra Vibhaga treatise from India basically talked about the one vehicle in terms of the Tathagata Garbha. And so it became, in my mind, misidentified as the Tathagata Garbha school instead of the one vehicle school.
Oh, interesting.
But the Queen Srimala's Lion's Roar Sutra is the sutra that focuses on the one vehicle specifically. The first sutra that focused on the one vehicle was the White Lotus, the true Dharma of the White Lotus Sutra, the Saddharma Pundarika.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think that's the only one vehicle sutra, or that's the sutra that teaches the one vehicle per se. But actually, it's Queen Srimala's Lion's Roar Sutra that Gunabhadra subtitled the Sutra of the One Vehicle. And it has several chapters on entering the one vehicle. And what you see there is it takes all the previous turnings of the Dharma wheel, the first turning, the second turning, and if you look at the Tathagata Garbha as the third turn, it takes all of those and discusses them from the perspective of the one vehicle. Then you see that the Lankavatara Sutra mentions in it Queen Srimala and her sutra, which is almost unheard of for a Mahayana sutra to mention another sutra in its own context. So we know that the community that was the source for Queen Srimala's one vehicle sutra and the Lankavatara, which also discusses the one vehicle, and therefore I consider a one vehicle sutra, were somehow related in terms of they were about 100 years apart. The Queen Srimala was written sometime in the early 4th century, and the 300s, yeah, so the early 4th century. And the Lankavatara was written sometime in the later 4th century or very early 5th century. the 400s. So we know there's a definite connection between those two sutras. And we know that one of the versions is that Bodhidharma came from southern India. And we know the history of the best history we have of Queen Srimala is that it came from southern India. And then we have this reference to Bodhidharma teaching the one vehicle lineage or the one vehicle school of southern India. So all of them started fitting together for me as that. So then I started looking at all the sutras that reference the one vehicle. And, there's at least 13 different sutras that are the most important Mahayana sutras. All mention the one vehicle, the Lotus Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Mahayana Parinirvana Sutra are probably generally the Lankavatara. I would say those are generally considered the four most important Mahayana sutras. And then there's a lot of others. So I've developed my own thesis that, and what many of the Samdi Nirmokana Sutra also mentions the one vehicle. And history has, what happened was the Yogacara school cherry-picked from the Samdi Nirmanakana Sutra and the Lankavatara Sutra certain aspects of their teaching to reinforce the idea that their teaching is grounded in the sutras, and these two sutras are the sutra basis for the Yogacara school. The problem with that is that they were cherry picking, and it's really the one vehicle that was presented in both of these. And what the one vehicle is, it's the movement to include and incorporate all Buddhist teachings into the one notion that all beings are Buddha, that mind is Buddha, all beings are mind, and all beings are Buddha. And so the teachings of the Pali Canon were the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma. The teachings of the Prajnaparamita are the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma. And this is found in the Prajnaparamita text itself. And then in a couple of the one vehicle sutras, including the Sutra of Golden Light and the Samdi Nirmokana Sutra. I don't translate that title when I'm talking about it because every single translator who attempts to translate that title comes up with a different translation.
What's your translation of it?
Mine is the Sutra of Union with Deliverance.
I don't think I know it.
No, you don't know it because I'm the only one that translates it that way.
What's the
other people? Other people translate it as the exposition of intent, or the revelation of the meaning. A lot of different translations.
So let me ask you a question real quick. So it seems a lot of the the Buddha Nature Sutras are the ones that kind of focus heavily on the one mind school. So does that mean the one mind school is built around like a kind of a positive, where the sorry, one second.
Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry about that. There's the emptiness sutras, and they talk about, the Heart Sutra, being, the epitome of it. They talk about
Right.
Buddha nature in terms of emptiness. And then there's the Buddha nature sutras, and they kind of talk about Buddha nature in more kind of positive, that's the whole discussion of why and what it
Yeah,
means.
but
Is
that's
it
the perfect
provisional?
question.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering,
This is what-
let me ask the question. Sorry. So is the one nature, is it more of a positive understanding of Buddha nature, like those type of sutras, or is it something else entirely? Go ahead.
yes, yes, it is. From the perspective of the one vehicle, the first turning was the thesis, and it taught that there are things, dharmas, we can identify things, the dharmas, and for example, the dharmas that we call the five skandhas, but there's no personality there. There's no person there. So that was the first turning. But there was still this subtle belief that things existed.
Mm-hmm.
The Prajnaparamita said, and this was the antithesis, said, not even things exist. Nothing exists as a thing. There's no person, and there's no chair, there's no nothing. Every dharma is empty. And then how shall I say it? This sort of became, I don't know if you want to say overworked or overtaught, but it became the emptiness school teaching, the emptiness school. Everything is empty. But if you read the Prajnaparamita texts, they have the three signs: signlessness, emptiness, and wishlessness, as the three gates of liberation. But they also talk about suchness, that suchness and emptiness are the same. But what happened with Nagarjuna in the Madhyamaka school is the suchness aspects of the Prajnaparamita pretty much got left behind, and emptiness rose to the top and became the thing that the Prajnaparamita taught. So what's called the third turning is the synthesis of the first and the second turnings. Like you said, a positive perspective on, it's not good enough just to say all this is empty.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the Zen approach comes in, is there was in Sanskrit, yatha bhutam is the word that means there is this. And going back to the 8 jhanas that you were talking about earlier, there is a Pali Sutta called the Smaller Sutta on Emptiness. And it goes through the 8 jhanas, and then it says, beyond that, there is this. And some people would call it a 9th jhana, but it's just jumping off. It's the jumping off the 100-foot pole. And it says there's yatha bhutam, there's this. And so that's the Zen connection to the one vehicle, in that, Zen is always saying just this. And just this is Buddha nature, the Dharma Dhatu, the one vehicle. Mm-hmm. So the one vehicle has two aspects. One is sort of the teaching aspect, where everything taught in all the Buddhist scriptures should all be synthesized or syncretized and seen as part of a whole teaching of the Buddha to all the various audiences who who he was teaching to. And it refers to all the verbal teachings. But on the other hand, there's the idea that the one vehicle is the mind itself. And so it's wrong to think of the one vehicle as the teachings. The one vehicle is the Dharma, is the whole Dharma Dhatu. The whole Dharma realm is the one vehicle. And the whole Dharma realm is the one mind of true suchness. And so that's the other aspect to the one vehicle, which is where it's not just the teachings, but it's the realization of our Buddha nature, the manifestation of our Buddha nature that is not separate, and there's no difference between the one vehicle and who we are. One thing, Won Hyo, the great Korean scholar, he says, if a text says that there is only one vehicle without a second, and that all sentient beings will become Buddhas, this kind of text is truly reflecting the complete revelation. And so he was also part of that. Now, this is sort of a sideline, but after Vasubandhu, there were basically three lineages of Yogacara. And Paramartha was one of the lineages. He came to China in the 6th century, the 500s. He, in his translations and his work, emphasized the one vehicle. But the other two lineages of Vasubandhu emphasized logic and the Abhidharma. And one of those lineages, the Dharmapala lineage, is the one that ended up going to Tibet. So you have very different approaches to Yogacara, mind only and consciousness only, in China and Tibet, because of the way that Yogacara came to China and the one vehicle.
I know you did some study group classes on the Queen Shrimala. Am I pronouncing that right?
Right. Yeah, I usually say Shrimala, but
Shrimala. Okay, I've never heard it said out loud.
So I may not be saying it right. Who knows?
Yes. So I didn't get a chance to look at those before this interview, but were those study groups that you have on Facebook? Or not Facebook, YouTube. Is it about this topic? If somebody wanted to dive into this,
it discusses it. Yeah, it discusses it. The Queen Shrimala one, that was 26 weeks. I've only got the first half uploaded. Okay. I'm not a computer person, and I would desperately like to have a computer person be able to upload all these things to YouTube.
I could help you.
But that would be great. And then I have a 10-week course on the arousing of faith study group I did. And then I did another study group on the Platform Sutra. And right now I'm doing just a 3-week. Last week was the first week, and then I got 2 more weeks, just talking in the way that we've been talking generally about the one vehicle.
And you can sign up for that on the Rocks and Clouds Zendo. Is that right, if I remember?
There should be a link. Yeah, there should be a link there.
Okay.
it's also, yeah, there should also, well, I guess Facebook isn't the easiest thing to
Mhm.
look at.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um, so we're coming up on an hour and 40 minutes.
Whoa, yeah.
There's other stuff I want.
I have got the gift of gab.
Yeah. So I actually like got through like 20% of the things I wanted to talk to you about. So can we do a part two before too long? What do you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I
Okay.
enjoy that.
Okay.
I just really love these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, there's I thought I would have more time to go through the other stuff, and there's definitely some things I want to hit you up on, and I want to talk more about um, the one vehicles in too. So, real quick, just summing up, you mentioned you were recently sentenced to being a assistant teacher. So,
Yeah, in our Diamond Sangha lineage, Daniel calls it apprentice teacher.
apprentice teacher. So does that mean
Right.
you're open for business to work on koans with people, or like what's the practical implications of that?
No, not exactly. What I have done some dokusan with people while Daniel's away,
Hmm.
who are working on the beginning koans.
Okay.
Um, but I'm not. He and I have talked about. I'm not going to be uh, assigning new koans to them per se,
I
but
see.
I'm working with them.
Hmm.
So it's a transition thing where I'm doing the dokusan with some people who are already working with Daniel, but I
Hmm.
wouldn't be starting off a new person at this point until I get a little more of that under my belt.
Hmm. It's
As from the structural sense of things.
if
I've been
oh
I
sorry.
was what they call kanto in this tradition for quite a few years.
Mhm.
So that's what I was before being labeled assistant teacher.
Are you guys back to meeting in person at this point, or is it virtual?
We're still doing hybrid. Um, on some days, Wednesdays, some of us are able to go meet in person, and others are not. We have a few people who are kind of far away, uh, and and so they're still visiting hybrid. I mean, visiting on Zoom. Uh, so yeah, we're hybrid is what we call it.
Mhm. If someone wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best thing to post that would people can contact you with? Is it your blog or your or Facebook, or what do you think is the ideal way to?
Well, a Facebook chat is pretty good. Um, Also, I don't mind if people email me directly, though I get so much spam that frankly, there are emails I have missed in the past if I didn't recognize who the sender was.
Mhm.
Um, that's at Wonderwheel at pon.net. So I don't mind people emailing me there. It's just that it's not such a great guarantee. But yeah, so Facebook chat is pretty good for getting my attention.
Okay,
Um,
I'll link to your Facebook profile then.
yeah,
Okay, cool.
great.
All right, cool. I'm looking forward to part two.
All
And
right.
then when I stop the recording, hang around a second. I want to ask you a question.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop. All right, thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.